and I'm the artistic director of Vancouver New Music. Can you hear me? Yes, maybe I just... And I'm very happy to be here tonight, and thanks to Joal and the Vancity office for community engagement, SFU here to hosting, and Steve Roden talk and presentation. Well, I will be really brief. Steve Roden is a great and beautiful artist. The curiosity for me arose many years ago when I stumbled in some of his work. I was fascinated by mainly the very open, using a term that he used a lot, lowercase approach to his work and his own perfect imagination. I'm saying perfect imagination, kind of referring to the idea that a musician may have about perfect pitch, for example, which is a good thing to have, but sometimes a very detrimental thing to have when you have to play with other people. While perfect imagination is a very beautiful aspect of his work that allows, for example, to create works that span in many different range and disciplines and practices with both a playful approach, a very inquisitive and provocative, at the same time extremely engaging in leaving space for people to get into his work and wonder and open up their own mind with different possible procedure, which are the same that Steve seems to adopt in his own kind of a process of investigation through his artistic work. His artistic work span in many different ways, has been said of him like or compared to a kind of a Renaissance man, which is a good comparison, thinking that Renaissance in a way opened up a way of thinking that was encompassing larger perspective around things, object, ideas, and not boxing them in a very strong, super disciplinary approach. And it's very refreshing to have artists that don't feel constrained by any specific boundary and allow people to wander together in spaces that are pure exploration of imagination senses, both oral, physiological, and sound. So I let Steve the stage, and thank you for being here. Thank you again, Joal, for hosting this evening, and thank you, all of you. And just want to remind you that also Steve is also performing in the first night of the Vancouver Music Festival this year, this Nomadic Streams. You'll find the program on the chairs down there. If you're interested, there's a bunch of other artists presenting beautiful work, and Steve will be performing in the first night, Thursday night. Thank you so much.
Welcome. I don't have a PowerPoint. I don't use sort of predetermined talks. So it's going to be messy, as you can probably see. The computer is not my friend, so there will be some arguments. I thought instead of, we could maybe turn the lights up a little bit because there's so few people. It seems a little dramatic here. And I'm not a dynamic speaker, so maybe we could put a little bit of light. A little bit. Not too much. Okay, that's pretty good. Oh, that's even better. That's perfect. Thank you. So I thought instead of sort of doing the talk that goes from the earliest things I did to the most recent things that I've done, but I wanted to, well, the first two images obviously are biographical and very important. But I also wanted to share some images of things that I find inspirational or curiosities or things that seem like pretty good fuel. So this is probably the most significant moment of my young artist's life. This was in 4th grade. My teacher's name was Mr. John Stone. He was not a very good art teacher. this project was to create a scary picture. And Mr. Johnstone told me that these areas here in the sky were very bad watercolor technique. So he told me that if I left it as it is, it's in my studio on the wall many years later and still there. And he told me that if I fixed the sky, he would give me an A. And if I left it there, he would give me a C. And so I went home and I talked to my mom, and my mom said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to leave it because I think the sky looks scary." And I probably didn't say F you to Mr. Johnstone, but I thought about it. And I feel like at that time, I mean, I don't know how old I was, probably like 9 or something. But sticking to my guns was so important, particularly when I got to graduate school, when I started to have the same conversations. And so for me, this is like the beginning of being able to make decisions on my own and to allow things. I mean, bad technique is a huge aspect of my process, and it's certainly a lot of the veneer. The second most important thing of my young life, in 1978, me and my best friend rode our bikes to the Whiskey A Go-Go to see Randy Hansen, who was and still is a Jimi Hendrix impersonator. And I'm not sure why they let 14-year-olds into the whiskey at that time, but we went inside to the club, we stood around, people gave us beer, it was pretty awesome. And they came out, 2 guys came out holding a big coffin. They opened the coffin, there was dry ice. Randy Hansen stepped out of the coffin playing Purple Haze, and it was like the greatest thing we'd ever seen in our entire life. So 3 or 4 months later, we went back to the whiskey. They let us in. We had hair down to here. He was like 14, wearing Jimi Hendrix t-shirts, and we walked into a Screamers concert, who was one of the earliest LA punk bands that were, they made their own clothes. It was like a totally different kind of world that we had ever experienced, and we wanted to be part of it. And so we started a band, even though we couldn't play any instruments, and we kept going back, and there was this really strong moment before this sort of skinhead people started to come into that scene, that it was a moment of potential, and also a moment of making decisions in a very different way. I mean, we didn't start a band because we wanted to become famous. We wanted to make a band because we really didn't know what else to do with ourselves, because we had all this energy inside of us and we didn't know how to get it out of us. And I think that is sort of the second large moment that really sort of helped me kind of get to somewhere where I'm still pulling from those 2 tendencies, poor Mr. Johnstone and me, a terrible singer. And so I thought I would share some of these images because they're images that I think about a lot. This is Iron Eyes Cody. He was, you're all probably younger than me, but in the early 70s there were these amazing television commercials for pollution. And Iron Eyes Cody would be standing in this like pool of muck. And as the camera closed in on him and they were talking about don't pollute, there'd be like a tear coming down the side of his face. And it was like amazing. And And so I showed this picture at a talk about a month ago, and somebody yelled out that he was Italian. And so he wasn't even an American Indian. But he also put out a book in the 70s of Indian Sign Language. And I don't know if any of them are real or not. I know this is actually the Navajo sign for rain. And I totally love the idea that this can be rain, and that you can buy into it, and how many ways can you think about the translation between this and that and rain. And I like things like that. I think the art world tends to not want to buy into simple things. This is a piece by William Tillier, and it's called, oh shoot, wait a minute. Okay, thank you. So, and it's just, obviously it's very simple. There's 8 rocks and it's 8 clouds and they're white. And I find things like this to be very powerful in terms of something to keep going back to and going back to. Again, a language into different visual languages. I'm not going to talk about everything, but these you should know about because they're totally amazing. These are maps that were done at the turn of the century. They were maps that were showing the relative scale of all the large rivers in the world, all the mountains in a certain part of the world, and they just compressed them all together into sort of a brand new fantasy landscape. And what an incredible way of trying to visualize scale. Here's another one. This is sculpture made from necessity. I have the 3 photographs leading up to this, but I don't have the last picture of the guy crashing at the end. These are 2 traveling one-man bands who created these crazy, insane, beautiful pieces of sculpture. This one's really great because he's playing the piano pedals with his feet. This is from World War II. This is listening. I think it's British, and it's listening for planes during World War II. And all of the technology is these big pieces of metal. This is making it your own. You can talk and ask questions too, because I'm not a very exciting talker. And you can be like, that's kind of dumb, or I'm happy to have a conversation much more so than, but I'll keep talking about these objects until you break in. This is Yasujiro Ozu's tripod. I am very much interested in sort of his ideas of point of view. Most of the shots in his films, interior shots, were done at the head height of someone sitting on the floor, so that the traditional sort of view of a person at that time in that space was, the camera was sort of mimicking that in a way. And I think the way that someone sees is just so important. If you don't know this book, you should know this book. It's by Raymond Queneau, called Exercises in Style. It's 100 stories. It's 100 versions of one story of 2 people getting in a fight on a bus. And it's completely amazing. It's just, you already know the story after you read the first one, and you keep going through, and the language is incredible. And I like things that get taken apart and put back together in different ways. This is 2 photographs that were taken by George Nelson, who was one of the early designers for the Herman Miller Company. And in the 1940s, he shot a series of photographs from lying on the floor looking at the bottom side of chairs. And again, looking at a space for furniture designers that they had never considered as being important in any way. I like things that have history. These are pieces from George Washington's coffin. They were available in an auction online. I didn't have enough money to buy them, but I'm very interested in sort of the history of objects and the question of is this really any more meaningful or not any meaningful because of its history? It depends. This is how I learned to make things. My grandparents gave me this book when I was a kid. And what's so amazing about it is that you can see everything is made of units. And basically everything I do is made of units. I tried really hard as a kid to understand how to build this form from all the little forms. I wasn't very good at it, but I do think this was enormously influential on my thinking in terms of building images or objects. This is being inside and outside at the same time. That's pretty awesome. This is one of the 5 comic books that were given to me as a child. These books are older than I am. They weren't comics that I bought off the newsstand. But I look at this, like people tend to ask me a lot about color in my paintings, and for some reason this image, I go back to this image and I see these magentas and greens and orange and yellow, and I don't quite know where there's a relationship to that, but I find the sort of awkward series of colors in this image feel compatible with my sensibilities. This is trying really hard and not doing it right, which is basically my entire life. I'm not going to talk about those. So I got out of school in 1989. Graduate school was horrific. We went to Disneyland one day to mock the simulated experience, which is like, it's like a football player wrestling with a baby. Like you already know what the outcome is going to be. And it was super boring and very jaded. So I stopped. There's been numerous periods in my work where I stop working in a medium that I feel too comfortable in. And when I got out of school and I was making these abstract paintings, they're relatively small. They were some of them were rooted in language, taking things out of context. But I felt like at some point that I knew what I was doing and it wasn't growing and I didn't know what to do, and so I stopped painting for maybe like 3 months or 4 months, which would have been a lot of time for me to stop painting. And I had been looking for this book by Per Lagerkvist, who's a Swedish poet, for years, and I obviously spend a lot of time in used bookstores, and I found a copy of this book, and then I realized after I pulled it off the shelf that it was not in translation. And so I spent about 1.5 years translating it into English. I don't speak Swedish, and I just used the words, reading them out loud, and trying to figure out what they might be. The whole thing is wrong, but finding the book and not being able to read the book allowed me to try to write, which was the medium for me was the scariest. Right? I went to art school. I have no background in writing. And so there are all these moments where one thing leads to another. This is a series of drawings that I did at that same time where I bought 26 different green-colored pencils, and then I read a text by Hermann Hesse, and I used the text. Each letter was for a different shade of green, and I made all these drawings following the text like it was a score. And the purpose was not just to make an interesting drawing. I don't think this is that interesting of a drawing. But it took me normally, it would take me maybe like 40 seconds to read that page. And when I was working with one page with the drawing exercises, it took me like 2 hours. And so it changed the pace of my process. And I think a lot of the things that I'm interested in is the process. I'm very much invested in the results. But I'm much more invested, I think, in what happens during the process of making, particularly if I have no idea what it's going to be. This is the earliest art activity that I remember. This was a Hot Wheels car design series of stencils, and you could I think there were 8 or 12 stencils, and you could utilize them in different ways to make like 60 different cars. And about, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I was at a flea market and I found this thing, and I had this rush of like insane nostalgia, and I went home and I started drawing cars, and it was super boring. And so I started to use the stencils to generate organic forms. And at the time, thinking a lot about sampling in music. And so like these bits that this thing is built from are not my bits, they're the bits that had already been determined. And so I'm really just rearranging them or sneaking them into certain places. This is really the first true system painting that I made. It's based on 433, and it's a translation of the text score for 433, utilizing A through Z. So there are lines that go from 1 inch to 26 inch, and I like the Hesse things. If it started with a T, then I'd make a 20-inch line, and then H is the 8th letter of the alphabet, so that would be an 8-inch line, and then E is the 5th letter of the alphabet. And so I wouldn't have to make a lot of decisions. And at the time, that seemed exciting to me because I was much more interested in kind of a sort of old school way of thinking about making abstract paintings. And so all of these paintings are based on these kind of systems. I like to use found systems so that I don't have to determine them myself. Obviously, I'm not the only person that works that way. I really love this because it's a Chinese restaurant and the colors on the plates are based on the different prices for different dishes. But depending on how messy they're stacked, they make a wonderful score. Yeah, I spent about 3 years translating this score. Where is it? Going the wrong way. It's, where is it? That's part of it. I've shown this at talks and only twice 2 people knew what it was. I think too, going back to the George Washington pieces, I chose this piece of music not because I actually didn't know what it was, but I was cleaning my grandparents' their garage, and I loved the way this looked. And so I kept it. It had been in my studio for probably 10 years. And so I made a little, you can see here, I'm trying to translate the notes. All I know is every good boy does fine and face. Half of it's completely wrong because nobody told me the bass clef, the notes aren't in the same arrangement. So, but it was a really interesting thing to do because, at least for me at the time, it was the first body of work where this object generated large paintings, sculpture, video, sound, and and I kind of started to think about how, instead of like a lot of, I think people work pushing in, like crushing in, and for me it exploded into all these other different kinds of directions. And I mean, I remember having at a dinner with some other artists, and somebody was talking about sculpture, and me, of course, really loud, going, "What do you mean? I hate sculpture. Sculpture's lame. I don't like that." And like a few months later, I'm like working on these large things, and I think contradicting myself is also really important. So I think this is another good moment, is that when my grandmother was a Sunday sculptor, and when she passed away, all our family went over to the space where all her stuff was, and she made swans and penguins, and she liked birds, and when I went in there to go grab some things, I wanted two things. I wanted all of her black crayons, because she used to go to Las Vegas and play Keno, and she would take the crayon. They don't even have these anymore, but you'd play Keno when you're gambling, and they'd give you these black crayons. And my grandma would, because my grandma was my grandma, she'd go out there and go to tables and pull the crayons and put them away. And so I wanted all the crayons, but I also wanted these. And these are the pieces that my grandmother never finished, not because she died, but just stuff that was sitting around in the studio. And like everyone has these things that you keep looking at them, and you maybe we could find a medium place between me and this object, and something can happen, but then you just set it aside. And so I didn't quite know. I wanted my grandma to have left me with a kind of gift. And I'm like, yeah, there's a bunch of stupid stones. What am I going to do with these? And so I started to paint still lifes of them, not in a sort of traditional way, but again, I tried to figure out a way to engage with these stones and have them mess up my practice, so that something will be changed by this experience. And so just the fact that I hadn't made work looking at anything outside of the picture frame since probably 87 maybe. And so again, the pace changed, and the way my body moved, and always to the right. And I'm still sort of thinking about these kinds of experiences. I resisted a lot in terms of trying to make sculpture, because that was my grandmother's sort of main form. And then I was like, well, what the hell if I can't, utilize these things to generate maybe the more iffiest sort of thing. I don't know. I mean, I don't stand up here knowing it all at all. I don't even know how to talk about this. There's six sound pieces, 5 hand-painted videos, I have several hundred pieces of wood. You'd have to walk into these areas, climb back here if you wanted to hear some of the sound. The lighting was lit with videos. There was no other lighting. It's hard to tell because this is a terrible image. And again, it was kind of like how to push the thing and also how to bring multiple mediums together. We lit the thing and it didn't work. And I was like, well, then why don't we just light it with videos? So... So I want to talk about, I want to go past this. Oh, those aren't on there. Wait a minute. Hey. Okay. I said it wasn't going to be dynamic. Pictures. Where is that? It's like when somebody's tuning guitar and you just want to kill yourself. Me looking through files. No, I swear to God, I was I was doing this in a more professional manner a couple weeks ago, and I had the one thing covering the whole thing while I was talking, and then I slid it off to the side, and I swear to God, the entire room gasped. Maybe I should talk about sound a little bit, huh?
That's what I was gonna. You talked about how the hot dog stand so and then you mentioned a few audio and somehow appeared that you didn't say what kind of turned you on for that. Did that happen?
Well, I mean, I can say that when I got out of the punk scene, I didn't know what kind of music to even listen to. I mean, I was kind of disgusted and really horrible. I had a horrible thing come crashing down in my life, and I was only 18, and it was like I had two choices. One was to like shave my head, go out to shows, and like hit people, which is not really the way I deal with problems. And so I started, I don't know, I just started to, I mean, I liked Cabaret Voltaire. I liked some things that were outside of punk, but sort of were part of punk culture. You know, a lot of, but things like with synth, or like things that were just kind of more moody than aggressive per se, like Bauhaus or something. And I really didn't know. I mean, I quit the band, and when I was all I do is talk about my biography. But when I was also like around 14, we used to walk to Tower Records because they were open till midnight, and then we could walk home. And one night, it was like around my birthday, this was way before the punk scene or anything. This totally crazy guy, I have no idea why he invited us to his apartment, and he played us weird synthesizer music. He went to like the Rocky Horror music thing every Friday night in costume, and he'd drive us home because we walked pretty far to get there, and it was like 2 a.m. or something. And so one day we were in the store, and he came up to me, and he was like, "Here you go," and he handed me Eno's Another Green World. And, you know, at that time I was probably still listening to Jimi Hendrix. And I brought it home, I put it on my record player, I didn't even think there was anything on it. It was like, what is this, you know? And then every couple of years I'd pull it out and I'd listen to parts of it. And I think in a way that was like the biggest sort of transition moment, because I have no classical background. There was no one in my family or like an older friend or someone who was like listening to Can or something like really great. And so it's like, how do you know, in a way that was like it was huge. Like, and there's, you know, I think it's the first track on the record is the one short piece with snow bells sort of going like this, and there's like this beautiful sort of drone behind it. And I always related to that piece, and I think at that point I was still thinking about it as music, and I'm not sure that I even want to have that conversation, because I still love and listen to and make what I consider to be music more than a sound artist, even though I have no background as a musician, but I'm a geeky record collector. And so it's like, and then slowly you get lucky and something else sort of comes to you in a way, like I remember listening to the radio when the radio was good in LA, and there were, I heard this piece by Daniel Lentz, who's a composer, and he did a bunch of stuff that I not to bag on him, but most of that sort of new music, 80s kind of very much rooted in repetitive sort of minimalism, and his work was like that, and I didn't really like it, but there was one piece that he did with wine glasses and mallets, and there was, I think someone was like holding bones or something, and it was something that was like below the radar in terms of like the way it existed in space. And I think for me, when I got at least to that point, that's probably like maybe 86, 87 or something. I mean, at that point, I still probably didn't even know who John Cage was. And when I was in graduate school, somebody came up to me, one of my professors, and said, everything you're talking about is like John Cage. And I said, John Cage, that's the guy who makes music with cactus. I mean, I know, like I had to like have that hit me in the stomach in the right way for it to work. And I think that there was also, it was a really, really good time in the mid to late 80s to be able to make work with very, very cheap materials. There was no, thank God, and everything was battery run, and you didn't really, you could buy a crappy instrument at a flea market and modify it, or just hit it, or step on it, or blow on it, and it was very much about this visceral experience, like touching things and making sound by touching things, and kind of connecting that with some of the kind of looser versions of what I was being taught about in school, But once I discovered Cage, it's obviously it just became so important to understand the kinds of processes I was thinking about, and I didn't really know much about that history, and it just, again, people giving me things to hear. And then there was these moments where I tried to work with these processes that I had come up with that were totally overbaked, and they allowed me, they allowed me to try to do something that I didn't have the tools to do it, and that gave me freedom. And so it just started to evolve slowly. What do you like? What don't you like? Really simple, basic questions, that are important. Well, I'm in a hardware store, and there's some crappy music playing super loud, and I'm like, this is the thing I want to protest against by making something that everyone else in the store wouldn't even notice it. Walk around with a little cassette in my back playing, walking around. Nobody can hear it. I can hear it. I can feel it. And I think too, because I was so completely unhappy with my graduate school experience, that I tried to move away from a lot of those ideas. Like the conceptual ideas went away for a while because they were just, they didn't feel like they were my own anymore. And so, I think there are just these moments where something happens and there's a shift, or you recognize something that you're not paying attention to, or you're paying attention to the wrong thing. And there just wasn't a ton of people at that time. There really, obviously there are probably 100 people in the world making sound art at that time, maybe 200 people, maybe. but it certainly wasn't happening in Los Angeles very often. And, and also it was like there were no expectations of like that I would somehow end up here in Vancouver giving a talk about my sound work. That's just a perk. But I still, I've stopped performing for a year last year. I stopped painting for all of last year because I felt like I knew what I was doing. And I really felt like with the sound that I knew the tools that I was using, and they were like appendages of my body. I mean, they were so close. And I did a great, probably the best painting show I've ever done, and I did one of the best performances I'd ever done. I mean, based on me deciding that, of course. And I just felt like there was no reason for me to make more. And so I didn't really take a year off of thinking. I did a lot of writing. I worked in another medium that I'd never worked with, which was photographs. And so now I'm performing with a modular, which is not my friend at all. I think I like my computer more than the modular at this point. And I started painting again without any of the materials I was using before. And I just think, I don't know, I also think for some reason, maybe it's just getting older, is I'm more patient. Like I'm not really worried about results all the time, which I think is really something to think about all the time.
What led you to make some of those first in-between noise recordings?
Like
releasing those in-between noise recordings? What was that?
Early?
To that?
Yeah, I mean, that was like this super...
So was this like from listening to the Eno records
I
and getting into that to the...
I think it was, there were some other things too, like when Gavin Bryars did that piece with the drunk bums singing Jesus, little Jesus song, can't remember the name. But like the first time I heard that, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. I mean, no question. I must have listened to that record like 100 times. And someone needs to kill Tom Waits, because the version with Tom Waits is really terrible. But more than just like responding to how melancholy, I love it, everything that sounds melancholy pretty much in music. But not just that, but the idea of like taking something that exists that someone else made and then inserting it into this environment to basically also have repetition. And I'm still influenced by that piece for sure, as opposed to like I think that whole sort of group of like Harold Budd and some of the other people who are doing things on that label, and there is I think there's just some kind of resonance in terms of pace, and also what kind of voice is it going to have? I don't know. I think for me, there's still like a lot of wiggle room in terms of control and letting things happen. I know when I'm trying to control something too much, I need to kind of walk away. I mean, obviously, technique is one of the like lowest thing on my rule of things that I care about. Technique would be probably at the bottom. And letting things fall apart tends to be important, or trying to fit them back together. I mean, I have a show up now in LA, and it's called When This Falls Apart, You'll Have to Put It Back Together. And I feel like that's my whole creed.
For me, I mean, the way I read it, for example, is more, instead of seeing things falling apart, I see things forming or reforming, so that you know, everything you said so far for me show me a way of thinking that, you know, take things, apparently even insignificant things, object or idea or text or sound, and they form in a forming process that is not, as you say, strictly controlled, but it allows for imagination, and also I think a very poetic approach to the materiality and the whatever poor, whatever that means, is quality of some material. Well, I think there is lots of resonance with certain kind of regaining a certain level of humility in regard of artistic activity. Like I always remember, like what you say remind me, for example, what an Italian composer, Giacinto Scelsi, many years ago said, that he was talking about, someone was asking, so how you write your composition, what is your music about, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, sound exists before my music, and music exists because I write it. And for that reason, I decided to dedicate more attention and curiosity to sound, because sound exists before anything and is primary. So I think everything you say, in a way, is in a similar vein, pointing out that I see a very poetic and poietic approach to things, so that you create, because there is a creative energy in seeing potential, in reinventing, and like things forming according to a path that is not prescribed, that is not assertive, is not demagogic, is not ideological, and in a way is also open for other people to see in the same way or see different things. So I find that very poetic in a very pure sense, but also very refreshing and also simple in a nice way, not simplistic. So I kind of I resonate with that idea a lot, and so.
Well, I think I don't want to like bag on grad school for the rest of my life, but I think there was, for me, there wasn't a lot of freedom, and also there was a sense that you could somehow place meaning on top of something by your argument for it. And I've always felt that the meaning comes out of the making and the activity, being immersed. And the meaning is not really up to me at that point then. It's up to whoever wants to engage with it. They might hate it, they might love it, they might think it's crap, but it is what it is, and I can't control that, and I don't want to sort of think that I can somehow imbue the work with meaning. It comes through the experiments that come out of that in a way, and and that's not to say that the things that come out of that are inadequate. I mean, I'm a human being, I'm automatically inadequate. And I think hopefully the work is imbued with something like that it's, in some way it came from a human, and it has a human quality, not like a robot or like my computer, but like a piece of wood that you hold in your hand and you keep putting it in your pocket and you put it in your hand, you're not even paying attention to it. And I think suddenly then that thing has meaning because you've had a relationship with it. It's like my favorite painter when I was really obsessed with Alfred Jensen, who's like one of my favorite painters. And I loved Alfred Jensen's paintings because they were based on the Mayan calendar. They were full of letters and numbers. They were like kind of sloppy but organized. And it was like everything I wanted in a painting, or even maybe just an artwork. And they would kill me. I'd walk into a room and I'd see one and I'd just be like, ah. And I went to see a show once, and I walked into a space and there was a big painting that was, there was no letters, there was no images. It was just a kind of like looked almost like a quilt. And even the paint was thin. And it was like everything I loved about his work had been taken away from me when I was looking at that painting. And I realized that everything I wanted wasn't necessary. The thing that he was doing was there, and it wasn't like poking me in the face this time. I had to stand there for a long time and sort of let it come to me. And I think that's, for me, that's a really powerful experience. I don't want people to expect certain tropes out of my work. I want to be able to disappoint them in a way, Like, I'm not using a score to do my performance. And I think moving back and forth is also very powerful, to not always, all the stuff we're talking about, I could do another talk that might be different, or wouldn't rely on some of the tendencies that have been maybe over-talked about, so that the practice is open. I mean, I want my practice to be open more than anything. I mean, I don't know, am I going to do a portrait of my dog someday that looks like my dog? And, my dealer wouldn't let me show it probably, but I'm still going to make it if I want to make it. And I think contradicting myself is, I have a lot of friends who are really fantastic artists, but they're protecting territory. And I think that's for me, obviously that'd be the worst thing that could possibly happen. I don't want to be a brand. I want to make stuff that's maybe some people thinks are not adequate at times. If we're thinkers and we're makers, we're not always perfecters. I certainly, well.
That's a question that it's coming up in my head over and over again as I'm listening to you talk about your process, and the idea that you move away from anything that becomes familiar, you move away from anything that you begin to feel you're mastering. I'm hearing, and tell me I'm wrong, that unless you are feeling that you're in a process of discovery, that you're working in an area that makes you uncomfortable maybe, that is unknown, that you feel that's when you feel most alive, and that's when you feel that what you're creating is most valuable, when it is upsetting you, or upsetting the things that you know, or upsetting the things that others, like maybe taking a perspective that you've never looked at and maybe no one's looked at before, and putting it up and letting it fall down. And for me, I have always worked in the opposite, always tried to perfect my skill, always tried to find a way to communicate. And by knowing my tools and knowing everything, that I would be closer to communicating. But you seem to be the absolute opposite, that the closer you get to perfection of a tool or a form, the farther away you want to move from it, so that you're in an area of discovery. Is that a way of describing your way of working?
I think so. I guess for me there's some aspect of the work where everything is not sewn up, so there's at least a place where, like this finger could somehow be here and I'm missing just that. Without it, it's like slightly incomplete. I could catch a ball without my pinky, probably. I could eat with it, I could get away with it. But it's just like the same conversation, and I don't want to keep repeating myself, but then I think, well, that would just change the way I eat, or the way I catch, or the way I throw, or the way I would do these different things if I didn't have my pinky. And that's probably this is the strangest conversation I've probably had yet in front of people about my pinky. But I think that For me, I want there to be a crack in everything in some way. I don't trust perfection. That's a harsh word, but it's not for me. You know, it's just not for me. I'm not looking to make things that are perfect or feel. I'd like them to be like everything is a seed in some way, so that something else can come out of it, as opposed to it being completed and done and placed over on the side. I mean, I have a friend who makes pretty much the same painting every time he makes a painting. I mean, they're geometric paintings. He uses the same process. He's invested in color relationships. You know, they're tight as tight can be, and he knows what they're going to be before he makes them. And you know, that's a path, right? My path is not that path.
Yeah.
And obviously, and I think it's, you know, I just think it's, for me, I think that it's very important to understand how important the process is, not just to the thing that I've made, but the experience of making the thing.
So would it be fair to say that instead of trying to communicate something, you're going to somewhere new, trying to find a perspective that you haven't experienced before, and then letting that speak to you, whatever you find there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty simple concept, obviously. I mean, it's like if you've ever been walking with a friend on the street and one of you picks something up off the ground, you know, and it's like, why did that just happen? And then do you put it in your pocket? Do you put it in your, you know, do you take it home? Do you put it in a frame? Do you know, like, what's that journey of that thing? But it's like, are you open to that first step? And that first step is the most important thing, is for there to be potential in any kind of grain, you know. And I maybe it's just, I mean, I don't want to have the pressure of making something that good. I don't know, you know. I would say there's, of the, you know, maybe 30 records that I've put out, there's probably 3 or 4 of them that people always ask me about. I don't know if they're better or if they're my masterpieces or they just sort of hit the right chord, or, you know, I don't know. You know, I'm not. Like I said, I'm not up here to say that I know everything about what I'm doing. I mean, obviously, I'm still a muddler.
Well, just also connecting to what you say, I think sometimes it feels to me, at least in the environment of, you know, just artistic creation or whatever, for lack of a better term, there is always this kind of idea that whatever we do, we think is important because either we express something about ourselves or we translate some idea about the world and the things. Well, maybe that is not relevant. You know, like it's the same thing. Like I think in the ephemeral nature of things like this, I mean, we are resonating more with an idea of beauty which is intrinsic in the world that we tend not to see. I mean, if you go in a forest, I mean, on the Sunshine Coast, I remember Jean, for example. I bring this example because it's really, really, really nice. You know, everyone in Canada, at least in this part of Canada, seems to have a clear idea of what a beautiful forest is about. Everyone, I think, you know, have been in the forest, understand what it is. That, you know, they have a sense of what that is, and they kind of resonate with that idea. At the same time, it's kind of a given for granted. It's kind of there's lots of projection about an idea that seems to express an idea of beauty that is very, I don't know, stereotypical sometimes. So I remember Jean came to the Sunshine Coast and made, you know, arranging a sound walk in the forest. I said, okay, what the people are gonna listen into the forest that they never listened before. So Jean kind of, in an interesting way, created a space in which, you know, it put embedded in the forest little record players with sound of the forest, slightly morphed electronically, but to a very minimal, almost inaudible level, to a point that people wouldn't actually hear that sound. I mean, it was there, but it was enough to kind of trigger a completely different attention to that exactly same sound that they would listen going into the forest, the same images they would see by transfiguring their perception with a little crack in their idea of what the sound should have been. And that simple manipulation of displacing attention, I remember created a beautiful reaction in the people that came out to the forest saying stuff like, I never heard the forest in this way. It was amazing. And this sound walk, just the enlightenment of a forest, that exactly the same thing. Already you know it, but you in some way were able to find a little crack that allows you to see a different kind of beauty, which is not there, but is mostly about you, about how you can change and morph if you allow yourself opening to a curious approach, which has not to do with your willing or desire of expressing something or projecting some ideas, but just exactly absorbing something that is a process, is a behavior more than an object. I find this really fascinating, and I think there is lots, that to do in terms of, also pedagogically, in terms of education or discourse, not just in artistic discipline, but in general, in communication and of idea or exchange of idea. We have grown up in a system that seems to kind of needing a certain kind of a qualification of an idea or expertise in expressing or refined, whatever that is, quality of your skills, which is all good, but at the same time, I think we are losing, that kind of poetic view, that kind of a simple resonating in a very humble, kind of organic. I'm not saying let's go back to the bon sauvage, live in the forest, enjoy, but at the same time, we are losing a lot of touch with ourselves in that regard. And I think your work for me has been, at the beginning, coming from a very opposed to you academic musical training, kind of disorienting, but at the same time, I've been resonating more and more with this kind of activity, because they are expressing more of again, a poetic interpretation, a poetic behavior, which is not even is not a profession, is not an artistic kind of achievement per se, but it's just a way of being, which is expressing more of a creative energy than an effort to establish any aesthetic kind of definition. I find that particularly fascinating and it's beautiful in itself. So thank you. But maybe some other people don't. I don't know.
So what about the sound? What about the sound of each? For instance, what about the sound of the collage? For instance.
The sound of?
Of the collage. That collage you have on the left-hand side, the first one. The first one?
That?
The first one.
Oh, that?
At the top, yes.
No,
Yes, what?
those are, these are going to be disappointing.
What is your experience with that?
There, I don't throw stuff away very often. So somebody gave me 4 file boxes of sheet music about 5 years ago, and I've carried those boxes to the trash maybe 7 times and then brought them back into my studio. And so I decided to just work on these sort of collage pieces, utilizing the existing material in each one. I mean, very basic. This one's Moon River. You can tell some of them, right? Right? So, I mean, it's just more material. I mean, I tend to think that I always work from something that someone else has made in some way, like conversing in some way. So, I mean, these are like, I have nothing really to say about them, except I wanted to make them and engaged with them, and to also, I mean, I like a lot of work that doesn't really seem to fit into sort of the way that I work. So these are other ways of kind of being able to converse with someone like Wallace Berman, or is kind of other kind of people that I'm enamored of, and so I can try and have a conversation with their language in a way. I mean, I've been making collages for years, but I've never shown any of them. No, my decision.
Because when you talk about how you approach, whether it's coming, whether it's a piece of paper, a piece of wood you pick up on the floor, or you're in a hardware store and maybe there's tools there that you can use to make sound and make music with, and there's other people in the hardware store that are not making sound with those, and they're just listening to what's playing on the overhead speaker. But so how do you reconcile that approach to that laissez-faire approach, if you want, that like everything's got potential, let's explore it, it'll probably fail, and that's perfectly fine with me, it's perfectly fine for me to take you along with that, and we'll see where it goes. But then you do make a conscious decision to go, I'm not going to be performing in the middle of the highway around 4 a.m. I'm going to be exhibiting in this gallery. I'm going to be having a show presented by Vancouver New Music. So there is a decision at some point to go, well, there's some stuff that is worth sharing, even though I've got a laissez-faire approach, and it's as potent whether I'm experiencing it right now on the sidewalk or I'm doing it on a stage, amplified under a spotlight. So how do you reconcile what I'm seeing at your approach, and at the same time going, well, I also want to put it on a pedestal. I want to also put it under the spotlight. I want to not just let whoever is around me in the hardware store when I'm performing it,
Right.
Witness or not witness when I'm performing, but I want to also take it to the stage.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I'm not probably the best person to talk about the pedestal aspect, or, I mean, I'm very lucky that I work with a gallery where my gallerist will let me do a show of sound works, knowing fair well that nobody's going to buy that work. And so, I mean, at that point, I'm not really making the decision that you're talking about. I mean, it's sort of her decision, really. I bring the work in and say, I want to show this. And, but I've been working with her for 14 years. And for the first 9 of those years, I didn't sell a single piece of work. And I mean, I got out of grad school in 1989, and the first show I had that I sold any work was in 2008. And so I don't know. I mean, that whole aspect of things is very difficult, I think. I don't think about the market, or I don't think about, like I have lots of rules with my relationship with my dealer, who I would say like is probably in the top 5 human beings who I owe most of my life to. And I mean, She's never allowed to be in my studio unless work is finished and framed on the wall. We don't talk about process. We don't talk, it's my domain, 100%. And then she can take whatever she wants and tries to sell it, and I don't want to be part of that aspect of things. I don't go to dinners, and I'm awkward at it anyways, and I never thought I'd be able to have the kind of career that I have, which is, I would say it's a sort of medium sort of thing. I mean, I'm super lucky that I am working in multiple mediums, because I get to go to like crazy music festivals and like play with people I totally, am humbled just to be in the audience with them, and it's like I'm sneaking in the back door or something. But I've never sold a sound piece. But I've gotten to show a sound piece at the Manila collection, which is way better than money. It's to see a piece in my favorite space that it could be. And I think if I start thinking about this kind of conversation, it's very difficult for me to reconcile, because I tend to at least attempt to, it's fantasy land, be honestly, but I'm in my garage making stuff, and that's all I'm thinking about, and I'm not worrying about where it's going to go, where, this or that. I have friends who are, selling work for close to $1 million, younger than me, and and I look at that and I think, that's completely insane. There's no, like, how do you attach that kind of money to an object and think that in 5 to 10 years it'll be worth more money? I wouldn't do it. But I think for me, I do have I talk to students about this, is that I look backwards and I look at all of the sort of, I call them my baseball team, of the group of artists that I feel are like my relatives in a way, or like they're the path that sort of got me to the kinds of things that I want to make and the kind of practice I want to have. And so, yes, Wallace Berman is going to be there, and there'll be a Burroughs collage, and there's a whole line of sort of artists who, some were successful, most of them were more like artists, and I think this is good advice in a way, is that I have a lot of friends who think that they should have a bigger career than they have, right? Everybody thinks that, but in a very sort of simplistic way, and I look back at the people like Harry Bertoia. If Harry Bertoia had never done chairs for Noel, no one else would be talking about Harry Bertoia, who's a genius, but he had a barn, and he did all this stuff in his barn in rural Pennsylvania, and he made some large pieces for airports for money, and but he put out 11 LPs himself in the early 70s. These are like, people who were doing this for different reasons. It wasn't like, he showed work at the Stadel Gallery in the 70s, but he didn't have any kind of like huge career that you would think someone like that would. You could buy a really nice Harry Bertoia monotype for $1,000. Crazy. And I think, if I look at my career and I look at my heroes, I feel like I can't complain about my work not selling for $1 million, because my work isn't part of that world. I'm not part of that world. I don't like that part of the world. I'd be happy to get a check that big, but it'd probably just cause me problems. But it's like, no, the people that I'm interested in, like Rolf Julius, there's just a whole litany of these people who were making work that was really exciting to a small group of people. They helped a lot of people like myself, looking at their work, meeting with some of those people, and to not worry about, like, am I going to get my pieces in MoMA or something? You know, it's like, that's all about, you know, like career movement. And it's just a different conversation, I think. And nobody owes you anything, you know? It's like, you have to sort of look at your work and look at magazines and galleries and stuff and figure out maybe if there's a place for you or maybe there isn't, because your work is so awesome and weird, no one will touch it. You know, it's like, that's just how it is. You know, if they think they can make money from it, then you'll probably be more successful than someone who makes something that's not saleable. You know, like that's just, we're just talking about business now. And the business of the art world is super boring. I was like, will it fit above? I mean, I had a painting that almost sold, and they returned it because their couch was too high in the back and it wouldn't fit on the wall. Yeah, and I told my dealer that they're never ever allowed to buy a piece of my work. And that's why I love her, because she said fine. But I don't know. I mean, I want to converse with the kind of history that I'm interested in. I equate myself as like being a record collector or something, you know, or like someone who collects comics or something. I'm not in charge. Someone else has to say we're done.
We're done.